In the electrifying world of celebrity, where egos clash and public personas are always under scrutiny, there's a raw truth often hidden beneath the surface. Fame can be both a gift and a curse. But what happens when the limelight fades and a vulnerable human being, just like the rest of us, confronts the harsh realities of their own inner struggles? Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was no stranger to the weight of public expectations. But one night, during a seemingly routine performance in Las Vegas, a drunken heckler would expose a side of Elvis that would forever change not only his approach to his music, but also his philosophy on life itself. On November 14th, 1976, Elvis was performing one of his most energetic concerts of the year at the Las Vegas Hilton. The crowd, a sea of eager fans, was electrified. The king had just delivered a blistering rendition of Burning Love, and the audience was on fire. But in an instant, the harmony of the show was shattered by an unexpected voice, a drunken heckler from the crowd, slurring insults at Elvis, calling him a fake, demanding he prove himself as a real man. The atmosphere shifted from jubilant to tense, and the eyes of 20,000 people turned to witness what would unfold next. For most performers, this would have been an easy call. Security would have stepped in, the heckler would be escorted out, and the show would continue. But Elvis, known for his charm and charisma, did something that no one could have predicted. Instead of retreating into anger or simply dismissing the heckler, Elvis made an unorthodox decision. He invited the man on stage. What followed would become a story of human connection, vulnerability, and unexpected healing. This wasn't just about a concert. This was about the profound power of empathy in the face of aggression. In a world where the loudest voices often dominate, Elvis chose to respond with understanding, and in doing so he taught us a lesson that would echo through the ages. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was no stranger to the complexities of fame. To the world he was the embodiment of perfection, charismatic, handsome, and always at the center of attention. But behind the stage lights, Elvis wrestled with a deeper, more profound struggle that many never saw. He was a man who, despite his success and adoration from millions, felt deeply lonely. The pressures of his celebrity status weighed on him. The constant scrutiny of his every move, the demands from the public, and the unrelenting expectations of his managers, fans, and even his own family created a sense of isolation that followed him wherever he went. Elvis, as much as he thrived in the spotlight, felt the sting of being misunderstood. His personal battles, especially those surrounding his emotional state and self-worth, were often ignored in favor of celebrating his talent. His fame, which seemed like an unassailable fortress, often felt like a cage. His fame was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it provided adoration and a sense of validation, but on the other, it came with the relentless feeling of being trapped in a persona that wasn't entirely his own. Despite this, when Elvis took the stage, the man who stood before 20,000 fans was always larger than life. His voice, rich and soulful, resonated with the crowd, and his performances became legendary. Yet, Elvis's heart often wandered between the raw energy of his music and the weight of personal doubts. At the Las Vegas Hilton that night in November 1976, Elvis was in the midst of one of his most explosive performances. The crowd roared with every note he sang, and he fed off that energy like a live wire, reveling in the sheer joy of the connection between himself and his audience. However, even amidst the glory of such moments, Elvis couldn't escape the silent storm brewing inside. He was constantly haunted by the question, am I enough? Was he the man they all thought he was, the king of rock and roll, or was he simply a performer playing a role on stage, masking the insecurities and personal turmoil he struggled with in private? The night had started like any other, with the roar of the crowd and the electric hum of anticipation in the air, but everything changed in an instant. As Elvis was transitioning from Burning Love to Hound Dog, a loud, slurred voice pierced through the music, cutting through the noise like a hot knife through silk. It was a voice filled with aggression, a voice that demanded attention, a voice that called out to Elvis, challenging him in a way that no one ever had before. It was a challenge, not just to his music, but to his very identity. In that moment, the vulnerability Elvis had always carried with him came to the surface. The words of the heckler, a man named Bobby Big Mike Henderson, who had been drinking heavily all afternoon, struck a chord deep within Elvis. "You're a phony," the voice had yelled from the crowd. "Prove you're a real man." The world around Elvis stopped. The band's music came to a halt. The audience, who had been wrapped in their admiration just moments before, now waited with bated breath. What would Elvis do? How would he respond? The spotlight that had once been a source of comfort for Elvis now felt overwhelmingly intense. This was no longer a performance. This was something much more personal. As Elvis stood there, microphone in hand, a deep internal struggle played out within him. Would he react with the anger and indignation that many would expect from someone in his position? Or would he do something that would transform this moment into something far more meaningful than just a confrontation? The tension in the room was palpable, thick like smoke, and hanging over the crowd. Elvis, ever the professional, had initially tried to brush off the heckler with humor, a trademark of his charm that had always worked in the past. "Well, hello there, friend," he had said with his signature southern drawl, the words carrying the familiar wit that usually disarmed his critics. The audience, expecting the usual response, laughed, hoping that the moment would pass. But Big Mike wasn't the typical heckler. He was different. His drunken words were not just an attack on Elvis's performance. They were an attack on the man himself. "Don't set you friend me, boy," Big Mike shouted, his voice cutting through the laughter. "I sep, talking to you. You think you set tough with your fancy clothes and your singing? Why don't set you come down here and prove you set you're a real man?" For a brief moment, the energy in the arena shifted. It wasn't just the usual heckling. It was a direct challenge. The crowd felt it. Elvis felt it. And yet there was something different in his eyes. As he stood there, the anger that would have been expected in such a situation was absent. Instead, there was a quiet contemplation, an internal dialogue happening in real time. As the audience continued to murmur, some booing, others shouting for security to act, Elvis remained calm. He could have easily called for security to remove Big Mike, but he didn't. He could have let his team handle the situation, but instead he chose to confront it head-on. With his band now silent and the crowd growing restless, Elvis did something unexpected. He stopped the music. He took a breath, and then, with a calmness that felt almost surreal, he did the unthinkable. "Sir," Elvis said, his voice cutting through the tension, "you paid good money to be here tonight, just like everyone else. How about we all just enjoy the music?" His voice was still smooth, but there was an edge now, a sharpness that was impossible to ignore. Big Mike, emboldened by the alcohol coursing through his veins and the crowd's rapt attention, wasn't interested in music. He was interested in a fight, in proving something that had little to do with Elvis or his fame. "I don't want to enjoy your music," Big Mike yelled. "I want to see if you're anything more than a mama's boy who shakes his hips for teenage girls." Those words, the insinuation that Elvis was nothing but a pretty face, a fake, hit him harder than anyone could have expected. Elvis's jaw tightened. For a split second, the famous Elvis smile, so often a mask of confidence and charm, disappeared completely. In its place, there was something more genuine, something raw. The crowd went silent. Even the most vocal fans seemed to realize that something much more profound was happening in front of them. As security began to move toward the heckler, Elvis raised his hand, signaling them to stop. This was not going to be handled the way they thought. This was not going to be a simple removal. This was going to be something else entirely. Elvis, the man who had long been a symbol of charisma and charm, now had the opportunity to show the world something deeper about himself. He wasn't just a performer. He wasn't just a man caught in the web of fame and expectations. No, this was his moment to show that he was, above all, a human being, a man who understood the complexities of anger, pain, and vulnerability. "Sir," Elvis said, his voice now carrying over the hush of the crowd, "you think I'm a fake, huh? You want to know if I'm a real man?" There was a deliberate pause, one that stretched the tension in the room to its breaking point. "Well, friend," Elvis continued, his voice now steady and clear, the invitation, unexpected and jarring, hung in the air for a moment. The crowd, unsure of what was coming, held its collective breath. No one knew what to expect. Some people in the audience cheered, others shouted for Elvis to stop, and security scrambled to figure out how to respond to the challenge. But Elvis stood there, unwavering, confident in his own vulnerability. The room held its collective breath. Time seemed to stretch, each passing second heavier than the last. As Elvis stood on the stage, his gaze fixed on the heckler, Big Mike Henderson, now slowly making his way toward the stage, the tension in the arena became almost unbearable. It was a spectacle no one had ever seen before, a concert turning into something far more meaningful than music and fame. This was no longer about the performance. This was about the courage to confront vulnerability, to face conflict head-on with something that transcended ego: empathy. Big Mike, emboldened by the crowd's attention and the alcohol coursing through him, stumbled toward the stage. With every step, the energy in the room shifted. What was once a confrontation brimming with aggression now became a strangely human moment. The audience, unsure of what to expect, felt the rawness of the situation, and for a brief moment it seemed like the lines between performer and audience, between celebrity and everyman, blurred. When Big Mike finally made it to the stage, his steps unsteady but determined, the tension in the arena reached its peak. The entire audience was on their feet, some shouting for security to intervene, others shouting for Elvis to stand his ground. And yet, Elvis remained calm, his face betraying no hint of fear. In fact, his eyes were soft with understanding. He wasn't angry. He wasn't ready to fight. He was simply present. For a moment, the two men, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, and Bobby Big Mike Henderson, a drunken construction worker from Phoenix, stood face to face. The contrast between them could not have been more striking. Elvis, in his iconic white jumpsuit, the embodiment of grace under pressure, and Big Mike, a man clearly out of his element, intoxicated, his bravado now tempered by uncertainty. "You want to prove you're a real man?" Elvis said, his voice steady but inviting. "Well, let's prove it. But not the way you think. We'll settle this like men, but not with violence." The words hung in the air, a challenge to the very premise of aggression itself. And then, in a moment that surprised everyone, Elvis did something no one expected. He extended an olive branch to Big Mike, offering not a confrontation, but an opportunity, a chance to show courage in a way that no one could have anticipated. "We're going to have ourselves a singing contest," Elvis declared, his voice filled with humor, yet serious in its underlying message. "Right here, right now. Winner takes all." The offer was so out of left field that it took the crowd a moment to process. A singing contest? Between Elvis Presley and a drunken heckler? The crowd, initially shocked, began to laugh. The tension that had been thick moments ago transformed into a wave of nervous laughter. The absurdity of the situation was so profound that it made the whole confrontation seem almost comical. But beneath the humor, something deeper was happening. Elvis was doing what he did best, turning the negative energy of the moment into something positive, something that would resonate not just with Big Mike, but with the entire arena. Big Mike, still unsure of what was going on, hesitated. "I don't want to sing with you," he slurred. "I want to fight you." But Elvis, with his characteristic smile and calm demeanor, wasn't about to back down. "Well, that's too bad," Elvis said with a grin. "This is my stage. These are my people, and we do things my way here. You want to prove you're tougher than me? Then prove you can do what I do." And so, despite his earlier bravado, Big Mike found himself on the stage, microphone in hand, surrounded by 20,000 people watching him. The tables had turned, and now he was the one on the spot. As Big Mike struggled to sing My Way, the only song that came to his alcohol-clouded mind, the audience could have easily mocked him, but instead something extraordinary happened. As Mike stumbled through the lyrics, the crowd began to cheer him on. "You got this," they shouted. "Keep going, Mike." And Elvis, the man who had been the subject of Mike's scorn, stood beside him, clapping, encouraging him. Elvis wasn't just letting Mike make a fool of himself, he was helping him find his dignity. When Mike forgot the lyrics, Elvis whispered them to him. When Mike began to falter, Elvis put his arm around him, urging him on. It was no longer about winning or losing. It was about giving this man who had come to tear someone down a chance to build himself up. When Big Mike finally finished his painfully off-key rendition of My Way, the audience didn't boo, they didn't mock him. Instead, they gave him a standing ovation. It wasn't because he sang well, it was because he tried, and in that moment they understood the power of vulnerability. Elvis's actions had transformed a disruptive, angry heckler into someone worthy of applause, not for his talent, but for his willingness to face his own fears and insecurities. Elvis turned to Big Mike, genuinely smiling. "That was beautiful, Mike. That took real courage," he said, his voice warm and sincere. And in that simple statement, Elvis didn't just acknowledge Mike's bravery, he showed the world what true strength looks like. What transpired on that stage that night in Las Vegas didn't just change the course of one concert, it shifted the very foundation of Elvis Presley's approach to his music, his fans, and his place in the world. When the lights dimmed and the final notes of "He's Got the Whole World in His Hands" faded, the room had been forever altered. The magic of the evening was no longer about the music itself, but about the human connection that had taken place in front of 20,000 people. The man who had once been the object of ridicule and scorn now stood beside his heckler, transforming the aggression of the moment into a powerful display of empathy. The real story wasn't just about how Elvis handled a rowdy fan, it was about how he used his position, not to further his ego, but to heal another person's pain. After the performance, the atmosphere was still charged with emotion. The audience, who had witnessed a rare moment of true humanity, wasn't just in awe of Elvis's music, they were in awe of his heart. And that admiration wasn't reserved for just his talent, but for his ability to diffuse conflict, to turn hostility into understanding, and to show grace when the world would have expected anything but. Elvis's decision to help Big Mike, to bring him up on stage and guide him through the most vulnerable performance of his life, wasn't just an act of kindness, it was a revelation for Elvis. For years he had been in the spotlight, performing to millions, but it wasn't until that night that he truly understood the deeper responsibility that came with his fame. His performance had always been about entertaining people, but that night he saw the opportunity to change someone's life. As Elvis reflected on the evening with his manager Colonel Parker and his team, he came to a profound realization. He wasn't just a performer, he was a healer. He had the power to affect people in ways far beyond the music. "I realized that night," he later said, "that I have a responsibility. When someone comes to my show, whether they're a fan or a heckler, I have an opportunity to make their life a little better." This moment, this seemingly small interaction, would go on to shape how Elvis interacted with his audience. No longer would he see them as a distant crowd of admirers. They were people, real human beings, each with their own stories, struggles, and emotions. And Elvis had the chance to connect with them on a level that transcended the usual performer-audience relationship. In the aftermath of the concert, the legend of Elvis's handling of the heckler spread far beyond the confines of Las Vegas. It became a lesson not just for other performers but for everyone. It was a lesson in grace, in humanity, and in the power of choosing empathy over aggression. People began to understand that conflict wasn't something to be feared. It could be an opportunity to connect, to learn, and to grow. And Elvis had shown them how. The story of Elvis and Big Mike became a parable, one that would be shared and retold for generations. It wasn't just a tale of a performer handling a heckler. It was a story about how to be human, how to rise above anger and divisiveness, and embrace the healing power of love and compassion. For Big Mike, the encounter would change the course of his life. After the show, he sat on the side of the stage, his initial hostility replaced by a deep sense of gratitude and humility. Elvis had helped him find his dignity again, and in doing so had given him a second chance at life. Elvis's kindness didn't stop at the concert. He personally ensured that Mike found work in Las Vegas, even going so far as to announce it to the audience. "We help, we don't tear down," Elvis had said, and he meant it. Through this small act of intervention, Elvis turned a man who had come to disrupt his concert into a friend. Big Mike's life took a different turn that night. He moved to Las Vegas, found work in construction, and worked there for the next 15 years. But the most significant change wasn't his career. It was his heart. He had come to the concert angry, bitter, and lost. He left with a new sense of hope and a renewed understanding of the power of compassion. The night Elvis showed him kindness, Mike's life was transformed. And it wasn't just his life. It was the lives of everyone in that arena who witnessed a true act of humanity unfold. As the final chords of the night faded into the Vegas night, Elvis Presley stood not just as a performer, but as a symbol of the extraordinary power of compassion. What had begun as a typical concert, a night filled with music and fanfare, had transformed into something far greater, a living testament to the healing power of empathy and understanding. Elvis's interaction with Big Mike Henderson wasn't merely about diffusing a confrontation. It was about teaching the world that behind every act of aggression lies a person in pain, and that true strength lies not in dominance but in compassion. That night, Elvis proved that the greatest gift a performer can offer is not just entertainment, but the ability to heal, to connect, and to transform a negative moment into a profound lesson. For Elvis, it was never just about the applause, the accolades, or the endless adoration. It was about using his platform, his voice, to create moments of humanity in a world that often felt devoid of it. His lesson wasn't just for Big Mike. It was for all of us. Elvis showed us that no matter how famous or powerful we become, we are all human and we all face moments of vulnerability. He reminded us that we all have a role to play in each other's lives, whether we're on stage, behind the scenes, or simply living our day-to-day lives. Empathy, kindness, and understanding are the true measures of strength, and when we choose these over anger, we can turn conflict into connection, fear into compassion, and even a simple concert into a life-changing experience. Reflecting on Elvis's legacy, we can all ask ourselves, how do we handle conflict in our own lives? Do we react with anger, or do we choose to understand? Have we ever been in a situation where someone's empathy or kindness changed our perspective completely? Elvis showed us that choosing love over conflict isn't just a path to peace, it's a path to a better, more connected world. As you reflect on this story, I encourage you to think about how you too can use your actions to build up, to heal, and to bring humanity into every situation. Let us know in the comments how moments of empathy have shaped your relationships or your own journey. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories about the moments that reveal the best of human nature.